Hello, I'm Bethany, and today I am going to be talking about the first in the series of What Do I Present Next? And the first thing we're going to be talking about is numeration. So I'll do the math, then the language, and then maybe even cultural, because as a part of my scope and sequence in MAPS, I do the math and the language. I'll get to that next. And on my scope and sequence, I have cultural, but I don't have a sequence for the maps of cultural because there's just so much for that. So today I'm going to be talking about numeration. So without further ado, what do I present next for numeration? I will go through each grade level and what I do in each grade level. So first I'm going to talk about my scope and sequence and maps. So the scope and sequence looks like this. It's a bunch of pages. It has the cultural scope and sequence, and then math, language, and geometry for first grade, math, language, and geometry for second grade, and math, language, and geometry for third grade. And then for the maps, which each one of these maps has multiple maps in it. There's about an average of 10 in each one. Some go up to 13 maps and some go up to, I believe, 8 or 9. But for the total math map, those take numeration, time, money, measurement, geometry, word problems, graphs, and extra concepts, and does one after the another in a repeating pattern. So then the kids could have a balanced plate of what they're doing when. So the total math map has all of them, but the numeration map, which is what we're going to be talking about today, is just the numeration, and then the next one will be just time, money, and measurement, and then just geometry, and then just word problems, extra concepts, and graphs. And then the counting map is for those students that still need to learn like 0 to 100, those types of things, or a little bit further than that, like into the thousands place, like the golden beads and stuff, which are also still on the the numerations maps for the first grade. But if the students, like that's a good one for kindergarteners almost, or if they need it in first grade as well, or any grade. And then the language maps, we have the total language maps, so writing maps, word study maps, grammars map, so the grammar symbols, and then the words map. Again, the words map is like with the counting map, it's learning all the blends, the short vowel words, and then the vowel blends. And then all maps include first, second, and third grade. This is just an example of the map, so when they get the presentation, they could check it off, or when they get it completed, they could check it off. If for some reason you don't want the students to have it so they can see next and ask you for the presentation, you could always just keep the scope and sequence and maps to yourself and just know what to present next to them. You could even do it as a whole grade level chunk. So let's get into the numeration for first grade. So these are how the maps look, but I'm not showing you obviously the whole numeration map. And also with the maps and everything, there's also, here, if you don't like the way these are laid out, there's just a list to go through that you could check off the presentation and complete it instead of just having these things. So I scrunched down my list of those and just have it in one map on here, although these are just the things in numeration and the flow, but there's also always extra things in the math maps and everything because each map, especially for each grade, like I said, has about average 8 to 10 pages in it. So that's that. So the first thing, you have to see where they're at. For the first graders, you have to see, okay, what bead chains do you know? What bead chains have you completed? And the 100 board. It's always interesting. At the first Montessori school I worked at, the elementary never touched the bead chains. And I worked there for 3 years. We had them in the classroom and we didn't do much with them. What I noticed when I've taught now for 3 years in elementary and 1 year in the early childhood at this current school I am at, the students do like to choose more of the bead chains. They don't do them very often, especially the second and third years, but the first years, they like them and they don't see them as like, oh, well, I did that in kindergarten or early childhood. I don't want to do them. And it's just a nice work for those students that need a work that makes it go longer if that makes sense, like I completed a tough work or a long work. And then, of course, the 100 board, if they don't know how to do either one of those, they should start on the numeration or the counting maps. And then after that, we talk about addition facts. So every single day in my class, students practice some sort of math fact. It's one part of their daily work that is different from their math work of the day. So, um, I just clumped everything together with the math facts so they know how to use them. Obviously, you wouldn't present these all at once, you would present them over time. But again, I'm just saying the next thing you have to think about are those math facts. Oopsies. Oops, I jumped ahead a little bit. So the math facts, so addition finger charts, bingo boards, colored beads. I find most students like to use the finger chart and the colored beads, especially for addition, to do their daily math facts until they get good at them. And now golden bead number building. I like to do these with the first years because it um, just shows them automatically because a lot of them like say I've done the 100 board. I don't need to do the 100 board. I like to make them do like the 200 board, the 300 board, the 400 board. And I don't make them necessarily lay them out because I don't have those, but they just write it on the 100 board paper. So from like 201 to 300, 301 to 400. But the golden bead number building is a staple that I do very close to the beginning of the year because technically, like they should have had in early childhood, the 45 layout and just golden bead work in general. And then I do like to do golden bead addition. I know some people just jump to the stamp game and that's fine, but I do like to do the golden bead addition with the kids. And then we do, um, before we do the stamp game or the um with especially with carrying before I even show them either one of the stamp games I like to take so now like and again in the map you will see when they actually in the scope and sequence in the map you will see when they actually should start doing this. It makes it sound like right at the beginning of the year they're doing this. No, a few months in I would do once they get like the addition with the golden beads, well maybe not even a few months in like the first or second month, instead of just doing once they've had practice with the math facts with the two colored beads, I like to do addition with three beads. So I'll put a bead bar, let's say it's like an 8 bead bar, and then a plus sign, and then a 2 bead bar, a plus sign, and a 5 bead bar, and then equals, and then they have to put the bead bar of what it is. And why we do that is that it helps with them having when they have to carry the one over to add, that's what that helps with. So this is a presentation I never miss for the first graders. And then we go to stamp game static first because static is easier. We don't do that. We don't, that's without carrying. And then we'll move into the dynamic, but that could be even months after the static. It's interesting with like multiplication. You'll see here in a second, you can't really do static for a long time because there's just so much carrying and multiplication. So it's like you just basically do the dynamic. So, but with addition, you could do static for a long time, even in subtraction without barring, because then the next ones, I just mentioned here, these again aren't all at the same time. And once you buy the maps, it will be clear when you do these, but odd even numbers, cardinal ordinal numbers, greater than, less than, and even to. Another favorite are missing numbers, addition and subtraction. So saying like 3 plus blank equals 6 or 5 minus blank equals 1 and rounding. They do need to know that. I kind of just put those together because I don't have enough space for everything. And then stamp game subtraction, which should lead them into dynamic or static and dynamic by the end of first grade-ish because they'll do it a lot in second grade. And then just some extra things. So on the map, again, it will tell you when to do it. But the other things I didn't include on just the brief overview of numeration for first grade, the addition snake game is a fun one. Fact families. I like to do fact families a lot. That is fun because that's once they know addition and subtraction math facts. Now I didn't put specifically subtraction math facts here and all the subtraction things, but it would obviously go in there. I didn't put that though. and then double facts, so 6 plus 6, 5 plus 5. And then addition facts that equal 10, so 6 plus 4, 2 plus 8, those things. And then multiplication facts, like if they get to multiplication facts after they've done a lot of work with addition facts and then addition equations, a lot of work with subtraction facts, subtraction, um, subtraction equations, and they can move on to multiplication facts because you'll see right at second grade, I like to start those right away, and I'll show you how I do them. But another thing, so and this is also why sometimes I don't include the subtraction facts. I don't know if you've noticed, but in Montessori, there is not a lot of subtraction work. There's just not. There's a subtraction snake game. There's the subtraction strip board, which the students, there's also the addition strip board, but that's one they use a lot in the early childhood classes. Some kids do use them in the upper classes, but you don't have to. That's one thing I found out. Like my first year after the training, I was like, okay, just go through the list and present every little thing, the whole thing, like every single material. Students don't need to see every single material. If they understand it one way, that's fine. You could show it. Sometimes I do show the kids, like, I know we learned subtraction this with this one, let's do it another way. And like the snake game obviously adds on. But when we'll get to multiplication with the checkerboard, the large bead frame, golden bead frame, and banker's game, it's all different. So yeah. But I try to get them to do multiplication facts by the end. So here's the second grade. One, we start out with addition, stamp game, review equations. Subtraction, stamp game, review equations. And that could take a few weeks, especially with subtraction with borrowing, because that is everyone's least favorite math ever. I don't know if your students also hate subtraction with borrowing, but that is everyone's least favorite. Even the third graders, they're like, ugh, I don't want to do that. I'm like, just do it to practice. Um, then this is what I was talking about with the multiplication, because the second graders are like ready for multiplication. So um, I like to do it's literally on the map. Bead layout 1, bead layout times 2, bead layout times 3, bead layout times 4, and they're literally laying out 1 2 bead, 2 2 beads, 3 2 beads, 4 2 beads, 5 2 beads, 6 2 beads, and so on and so forth. And that's like one a day if they want to do, but again, like this is just a numeration part of it. So when we talk about fractions, so I like to have them try to do one of each of the categories a week. So for a week, so they might do the multiplication for their actual math work, they might do multiplication bead layout, 5, and the next day they're doing fractions, and then the next day they're doing graphs, and the next day they're doing geometry, something like that. Um, I want to see, sorry. I don't think I put it on here. I hope I did at some point. I don't think I did. But I was told in my training the second grade work is the dot game. And I know I don't have it up here, but in here, before they like do the multiplication, I like to have them do the dot game. The dot game is fun for them. For second graders. So they do the dot game. Some first years they let do the dot game. And I know they have it in the early childhood that sometimes they don't use it though. And then the multiplication game dynamic, because like I said before, it's just too hard to do static with that unless it's just like two. The most you can do is like 2 times 3, 22 times 3, or you know, 2,222 times 3, because with all this, with the addition equations and subtraction equations, multiplication equations and division equations, we start with those 4-digit numbers. We don't start with like 22 plus 32. No, it's like 5,687 plus 8,954, If you're a Montessori teacher, you know. So then reading numbers on the checkerboard, and why I do this is so that from the multiplication stamp game, they work on that for a while. And when they're ready for the next level, it's reading numbers on the checkerboard, because then they could read up into the millions. And that is a fun one. Reading up into the millions. And then they read numbers on it for fun. And then they do the checkerboard multiplication. I like to do this one first because the large bead frame is confusing for students. It very much is. The checkerboard is much better. The second one would probably be the large bead frame. And then, of course, I put addition and subtraction stamp game, but you could always do the short bead or the small bead frame too for those. But with the students I've had, they don't like the bead frames. They would rather have the stamp games. And yes, the checkerboard is first, that. And then just some other ones with multiplication. It's just a lot of multiplication work in second grade. You have the reoccurrence of zero, the inverse factor of the same product, just a bunch of different multiplication presentations. There's even more than that, the squares of numbers. And then my favorite second grade work, although second grade, I don't know, I think I like second grade the best. Just because they have the bead layout and the deck game and I mean, at least for numeration. And then the best, the decanomial. And usually, instead of doing like the vertical and then the horizontal layout, I like to go just to the transformation, which is why I do the squares of numbers before that layout. I guess you could do the vertical layout and then the squares of numbers and then say, okay, we're going to do the vertical layout or the horizontal layout of the decanomial again. And then I would show them the transformation where the spine turns in to squares. All the rest of them match up into squares, and then the squares turns into cubes, and then the cubes stack up to be the pink tower. And that's my favorite second grade presentation. And then the last things we just do all of the large bead frame, maybe the banker's game. And the golden bead frame is last because that takes away the colors and everything. Um, I don't mostly get to these ones. Sometimes we do. The banker's game is actually fun. We just don't lay it out a lot, but the kids do like doing it. The golden bead frame, they already know because I also have the kids do math facts, I mean math equations every day, so they're practicing and they might be using the checkerboard, but usually not because multiplication is probably the easiest math for students to do, in my opinion. And then here's just some other things, the multiplication snake game. The fact, families, addition, subtraction, they still do. If they get to division by the end, like I have here, well, there's another multiplication factors of the same number, factors of one number, but the division facts, if they get to the bead board and finger charts, I will have them do. There's also a multiplication bead board. I'll have them do fact families with multiplication and division. And then third grade for numeration, adding, oops, addition, subtraction review. I try to put adding and addition together. Oops. Just gotta get rid of that G. And then checkerboard review and other multiplication, whatever they want to see, because it's like coming back from the summer and seeing if they remember how to do any of it. But they don't need to see all of them. It's on the map if they want to, but they don't have to. Squares of numbers, squares of a binomial. Good review, division test tube. Um, I mean, you could also do division stamp game too. That would be the most recommended thing. I just didn't write it here because I didn't write everything on here, obviously. And then two-digit multiplication large bead frame or any of the four, two-digit. The kids love learning two-digit multiplication, and I would say it's on the large bead frame because of the presentation and the paper where you take the pencil and you like see writing the red zero. That's why I put the large bead frame for this one. How you have it on the presentation paper. I don't know. I don't know. My training gave me where it's like it has the colored paper and you could buy this paper. It's a large bead frame paper, and then they write the numbers and then they lay it out. So it's the easiest and clearest way to see, oh, we're adding a zero. Although the checkerboard is fun too, where you move it over. And then Decurion division, square of a trinomial with the cubes, passage of one square to the next, and of the consecutive square and non-consecutive squares, division with zeros, and then division with a two-digit divisor and a three-digit divisor. Sometimes I don't really get all the way there because there's other things like fractions are big in third grade, but obviously we're not talking about fractions on this video. We will in another video, but um, yeah, there's just a lot of other things that are going on. So that's very good. So look at all of those. And again, the maps are way more in depth than this. I wish I could just show you, but then that would be basically giving the thing. And I put so much time and effort into and years into perfecting this, and you could also, they're also editable. So if you want to change around how you present things, you can to make it your own. You could also, maybe you have different works. For example, one other work I forgot to put on here is an infinity street, and that is a fun one to do in third grade, especially, and that's numeration. So there's a lot of things that I didn't include obviously in here, but this is just like the basic flow, but it makes it seem like such a little amount of time, but it's the whole year. But thank you for watching. Again, the links will be in below. You could even join the free hub that has all my math fact pages on it. And there's another one with Montessori activities, and then of course the scope and sequence and maps. But if you're not a part of the free hub, I would join that so you get all the things. You could see my work plan and everything, and then you can see the other products. Thank you for watching.